January 1940. The cold winds of winter sweep across the bustling city of Detroit, where the hum of industry is relentless. The United States is still 2 years away from entering the war, but the threat of conflict looms large. A new war is brewing in Europe, and the demands for military production grow louder with each passing day. As factories churn out weapons and machinery, one crucial material is in short supply: magnesium. Magnesium, a lightweight metal critical for aircraft construction, military vehicles, and munitions, is almost entirely absent from American shores. The country, dependent on foreign imports, faces a crippling shortage. Without it, the speed of production will slow, and the U.S. military's edge in modern warfare could be compromised before the war even begins. In the quiet halls of Dow Chemical, a team of engineers huddles over an idea, an audacious plan to extract magnesium from seawater itself. A seemingly impossible solution. But for the men and women at Dow, failure is not an option. The war machine is already gearing up, and America's ability to fight is at stake. The year 1940 was a time of uncertainty. Europe had been embroiled in conflict since the previous September, with Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland sparking the Second World War. In the Pacific, tensions between Japan and China had already ignited a deadly conflict. Meanwhile, the United States, despite the growing turmoil abroad, remained officially neutral. Yet, the shadow of war cast a long and heavy presence over the country. In Washington, the government was beginning to recognize the need for military preparedness. The United States had a powerful industrial base, but its ability to rapidly produce weapons and equipment for an escalating global conflict was still in question. The country faced a logistical challenge of monumental proportions: how to arm its forces without depending on foreign supplies. Among the most critical needs was magnesium, a vital component in the construction of aircraft, tanks, and other military technologies. Magnesium is one of the lightest structural metals, prized for its strength-to-weight ratio. It was essential for the manufacturing of aircraft engines and fuselages, the creation of armor plating, and even the production of incendiary bombs. By 1940, the United States was importing over 90% of its magnesium from foreign sources, primarily from the mineral-rich salt lakes of China. But with the outbreak of war in Europe, those supply lines were no longer guaranteed. The prospect of a prolonged war meant that the U.S. could no longer afford to rely on foreign imports, especially given the potential for the Axis powers to cut off these vital resources. The shortage was acute. In 1940, the U.S. had barely enough magnesium to meet its domestic demands. Key military contracts were being delayed, and the looming uncertainty about the availability of magnesium became a matter of national security. Without a steady supply of this vital metal, the American war effort could be severely hampered. Yet, at the time, there were no domestic sources capable of meeting the demand. It was against this backdrop that the Dow Chemical Company, one of the largest and most successful chemical manufacturers in the United States, recognized the urgent need to find a solution. A team of Dow engineers began researching ways to extract magnesium in a way that would be viable for large-scale production. The solution, they realized, lay beneath their very feet, in seawater. Seawater, it turned out, contained small but consistent traces of magnesium. In fact, the oceans were a vast, untapped reservoir of the element. While the process of extracting magnesium from seawater was known to be theoretically possible, it had never been done on a commercial scale. The challenge was immense. But the war was already knocking at the door, and innovation was the only answer. The team at Dow was determined to take on the challenge. With support from the U.S. government, which was already keen to mobilize its industrial resources for war, Dow Chemical began developing a method to extract magnesium from seawater. If they succeeded, it would not only solve the country's magnesium shortage, but also provide a vital strategic advantage. As the months passed, the urgency surrounding the magnesium shortage only deepened. By the end of 1940, the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, had already taken steps to secure key mineral resources, including magnesium, across the globe. In the Pacific, Japan had occupied large swathes of China and Southeast Asia, controlling some of the world's richest magnesium deposits. Europe, under Nazi occupation, was rapidly becoming a fortress, limiting access to many strategic raw materials. The U.S. could not afford to wait for international relations to resolve themselves. It needed to act swiftly to ensure it had a reliable source of magnesium for the war effort. At the time, the U.S. military-industrial complex was not yet fully mobilized. Factories that would eventually turn out thousands of warplanes, tanks, and ships were still in the early stages of retooling for wartime production. The outbreak of the war had sparked a feverish race to develop new technologies, weapons, and materials that could tilt the scales in favor of the Allies. While American manufacturing was already vast and efficient, its raw material needs had not been fully anticipated. Magnesium, as a critical component in the development of modern weapons, was a glaring hole in the country's military preparedness. In response to this challenge, the U.S. government had already begun working with industry leaders like Dow Chemical to solve the problem. At first, there were many voices questioning whether magnesium could be extracted efficiently from seawater. The method was technically feasible, but had never been implemented on a scale large enough to meet the demands of war. Dow's engineers knew the solution would require a significant breakthrough in chemical processing, something that had eluded scientists for years. The extraction process itself was complex. Magnesium is found in seawater in the form of magnesium chloride, a compound that needed to be separated and then converted into pure magnesium metal. The process involved a series of steps, including the use of electrolysis, a method in which electric current is passed through a solution to separate the metal. However, the challenge was not just the chemical process. It was scaling it up to an industrial level where large quantities of magnesium could be produced quickly and efficiently. In the face of these challenges, Dow's engineers, led by a small team of visionary scientists, began their work in earnest. The task was enormous. The United States needed to produce magnesium in quantities far beyond the existing supply chains, and to do so before the Axis powers could further disrupt international markets. What they lacked in experience, they made up for with ingenuity. The pressure to succeed was immense, not just for Dow, but for the entire war effort. The early efforts were fraught with difficulties. The process was costly, the yield was initially low, and the technology was unproven. But failure was not an option. Each day, Dow's engineers worked tirelessly, refining the electrolysis process and optimizing the method of extraction. They knew that if they could make it work, they would not only solve the magnesium crisis, but also create a blueprint for extracting other vital materials from seawater in the future, a revolutionary idea that could change the course of resource management forever. As 1941 drew closer, the United States remained on the precipice of war. On the diplomatic front, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his administration had been laying the groundwork for closer ties with the Allies, especially Great Britain. Meanwhile, the American military was silently preparing for the inevitable involvement in the war, which would soon come with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December. The demand for magnesium would soon skyrocket as the U.S. mobilized for war on two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. The success of Dow's project would be more than just a technical achievement. It would become a symbol of American ingenuity, self-reliance, and industrial might. With magnesium finally accessible from domestic sources, the United States would be poised to move forward in the war, equipped with the technology and materials needed to face the Axis powers head-on. The extraction of magnesium from seawater was more than just a scientific breakthrough. It was a triumph of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming adversity. When the call for magnesium came, there was no established method to quickly produce the quantities needed for military applications. To solve this, Dow's engineers had to work against time, resources, and their own understanding of what was possible. In the midst of the war, with everything at stake, they managed to turn a theoretical process into reality. The human element of this story cannot be overstated. For months, the team at Dow faced technical setbacks, failures, and financial pressure. The stakes were as high as they could get. Yet, through tireless experimentation and countless hours of refinement, they slowly began to improve the process. The early days of extracting magnesium from seawater involved a great deal of trial and error, but each failure taught the engineers something new, pushing them ever closer to their goal. The team's commitment to problem-solving in the face of near-impossible odds was emblematic of the spirit that defined the entire American war effort. It wasn't just about the technology, It was about the determination of the people behind it, driven by a desire to ensure victory at any cost. By the time the electrolysis method was perfected, Dow's engineers had produced a significant breakthrough. They had found a way to tap into an almost limitless resource, seawater, which, in the span of a few months, became a critical asset in the war. The magnesium they produced went on to serve not just in ammunition and aircraft, but in the technology of warfare itself. The human factor in this success was what made it possible in the first place. It wasn't just about chemicals and processes. It was about the collective will to succeed against all odds. Magnesium was an essential component in many key weapon systems during World War II. It was used extensively in the construction of military aircraft, including the lightweight and powerful B-17 Flying Fortress, which would go on to be one of the most iconic bombers of the war. Magnesium, with its light weight and high strength, was integral to creating the strong yet relatively lightweight fuselages and components that gave American bombers a significant advantage in speed, maneuverability, and overall performance. However, the importance of magnesium extended beyond aircraft. It was also used in tanks, artillery shells, and a variety of military vehicles. Without a steady domestic supply of magnesium, the U.S. would have been forced to rely on uncertain international sources, many of which were already under Axis control. The ability to extract magnesium from seawater gave America a self-sufficient supply of this critical material. This allowed the U.S. to ramp up its military production at a time when every ounce of material counted. The tactical advantage provided by this new source of magnesium cannot be overstated. The U.S. was able to maintain and expand its industrial capacity without the fear of supply chain disruptions caused by enemy actions. As the war intensified, this newfound resource would be integral in the development of increasingly advanced weaponry, from bombers to tanks to naval vessels. Each of these would rely on magnesium to maintain a balance of lightweight and durability, key to achieving battlefield superiority. Magnesium's versatility and role in the war machine also mirrored a broader shift in U.S. military tactics. With access to more of the materials needed to fuel the war, the United States could afford to engage in large-scale operations, deploy advanced technology, and deliver firepower that few other nations could match. Magnesium, extracted from seawater, played a subtle but crucial part in this technological evolution. The success of Dow's magnesium extraction process didn't happen in isolation. It was part of a broader national effort. The U.S. government, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, had already begun mobilizing the country's industrial base long before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Recognizing that war was imminent and inevitable, Roosevelt implemented policies that would convert American factories and research institutions into engines of war production. The decision to fund research into magnesium extraction from seawater was in line with this broader strategy. The military and civilian sectors worked hand in hand to meet the ever-growing needs of the war effort. The Department of War, along with the National Defense Research Committee, NDRC, played pivotal roles in driving the research and supporting private sector efforts like Dow's. Roosevelt's leadership set the stage for technological innovations across the board, ensuring that the country's industrial base was ready for the challenges of a global conflict. His ability to inspire and coordinate efforts between government, industry, and military leaders enabled breakthroughs in manufacturing processes, material science, and logistical coordination, critical elements in winning the war. The magnesium extraction effort was one of many such innovations, a testament to Roosevelt's commitment to ensuring that America's technological and industrial superiority was never in question. On the battlefield, General Dwight D. Eisenhower's leadership in Europe and the Pacific also made use of these innovations. The steady supply of magnesium allowed American forces to rely on the latest weaponry, from high-performance bombers to durable tanks, even in the harshest combat environments. Eisenhower's ability to capitalize on technological advances was integral to the success of D-Day and the eventual Allied victory in Europe. Both Roosevelt's strategic foresight and Eisenhower's tactical brilliance would be bolstered by the availability of materials like magnesium. The leadership in Washington and on the battlefield knew that victory would depend not only on the bravery of soldiers, but also on the technological edge provided by American innovation. For the Axis powers, The emergence of American technological supremacy was both a source of frustration and awe. In particular, the Germans and Japanese were shocked by the pace at which the United States was able to innovate and produce weapons. They had underestimated the ability of American industry to mobilize, and when they saw the U.S. applying cutting-edge science to solve problems like magnesium shortages, they realized they were facing an adversary unlike any other. The Germans, who had already faced difficulties in acquiring raw materials during the war, could only watch as the United States secured a steady supply of magnesium from its domestic sources. The German Wehrmacht, which had relied heavily on light alloys for the construction of tanks and aircraft, saw this as a significant disadvantage. At one point, German engineers were forced to look for alternatives to magnesium in their own weapon systems, with mixed results. Meanwhile, the Japanese, who had a strategic focus on securing resources from their occupied territories in Southeast Asia, found themselves constantly behind the curve. They struggled to secure the necessary raw materials for the production of high-tech weapons and, as a result, lagged in developing the advanced bombers and tanks that would have given them a technological edge. In contrast, the U.S. was advancing rapidly, fueled by a steady supply of materials like magnesium and other critical elements. As the war progressed, the Germans and Japanese would come to recognize that the American industrial juggernaut, combined with the ingenuity of its scientists and engineers, would be one of the decisive factors in their defeat. The magnesium extraction process was one small but crucial part of that larger picture, a reminder of the unexpected power that innovation and resilience could bring in wartime. The turning point in the U.S. industrial war effort, particularly in relation to magnesium extraction, came in the form of a decisive moment during the early years of World War II. The realization that technological superiority, driven by innovative manufacturing techniques, would define the outcome of the war. In the midst of a global conflict, the U.S. had already begun to shift the balance of power on the battlefield, and it was clear that raw materials, like magnesium, would play an integral role. It was in 1942, 2 years after Dow Chemical had launched its magnesium extraction program, that the true value of this innovation would come into sharp focus. The U.S. Army Air Forces had already deployed bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, which relied heavily on magnesium for their lightweight, yet durable, frames. These bombers, considered the backbone of Allied air campaigns, had suffered from the wear and tear of prolonged flights. Their magnesium frames allowed them to withstand high-stress missions, but they also required a constant flow of the lightweight metal for repairs and new production. By 1942, the urgency of maintaining an uninterrupted supply of magnesium had reached its peak. With the United States fully engaged in the war against both Germany and Japan, the demand for materials to fuel weapons production was at an all-time high. At the same time, the war was stretching supply lines thin, and the need to control the resources crucial to the war effort was becoming ever more apparent. The fact that Dow's magnesium was now available in abundance was a game-changer. As American bombers soared across the skies of Europe and the Pacific, their lightweight magnesium bodies ensured that they could stay aloft for longer periods, carry heavier payloads, and survive the brutal realities of war. This technological edge, born out of necessity, gave the Allies a strategic advantage that the Axis powers simply could not match. The ability to repair, replace, and enhance aircraft and other critical machinery at scale was a linchpin of the Allied war machine. In tandem with the success of magnesium extraction, the U.S. also became the global leader in mass production techniques. The efficiency of American manufacturing, combined with the constant supply of magnesium, enabled the Allies to churn out weapons at a rate that overwhelmed Axis forces. American factories, under the direction of General William S. Knudsen and others, were able to produce tanks, planes, and ships at an unprecedented rate. These materials, from the magnesium used in aircraft to the steel in tanks, became the foundation upon which the entire Allied war effort would rest. The turning point, however, was not just technological, it was psychological. As U.S. production surged and Allied forces saw their weaponry and technology improve at a staggering rate, the Axis powers began to lose confidence. Germany's bombing raids on Britain had been met with a new counterforce. American bombers that, thanks to magnesium frames, could endure the rigors of high-altitude combat and return to base time and again. In the Pacific, American bombers and fighters took to the skies in large numbers, dealing devastating blows to the Japanese fleet and infrastructure. The sheer scale of the Allied response began to feel insurmountable. For the Axis, who had long believed that their technological prowess would give them an edge, it was a shock to see the U.S. maintain its technological lead, its aircraft performing at levels the Germans and Japanese could only envy. The magnesium breakthrough was one of the many innovations that, when combined with the sheer scale of U.S. industrial power, spelled the beginning of the end for the Axis. The culmination of Dow Chemical's magnesium extraction project came in 1943 with a pivotal moment in the war. The Allies had shifted from a strategy of defense to offense, and one of the critical assets in this transformation was the magnesium-enhanced B-17 and B-24 bombers. Their resilience and ability to carry out sustained bombing campaigns marked a significant evolution in aerial warfare. The importance of magnesium as a lightweight yet tough structural material had a direct impact on the outcomes of battles such as the raid on Ploiești, Romania, and the strategic bombing of German industrial hubs. In August 1943, the Allies launched Operation Tidal Wave, one of the most ambitious and dangerous bombing raids of the war. Aimed at destroying the Nazi-controlled oil fields in Romania, the raid was carried out by 177 American bombers, many of which were built with magnesium-laden frames. The aircraft, forged in American factories, were tasked with flying long distances and withstanding heavy enemy fire. Many of the bombers encountered fierce opposition from German Luftwaffe fighters, yet the magnesium-alloyed airframes held up, providing critical strength and agility that allowed them to endure the punishing conditions of the mission. However, not all went according to plan. Although the raid was tactically disastrous due to heavy losses, the fact that American bombers were able to even undertake such a long-range, high-risk mission was an achievement in itself. The United States, through its technological advancements and sheer production might, had been able to equip its forces with weapons capable of changing the tide of war. The use of magnesium as a core element in aircraft design was no small part of that achievement. It was the first real sign that American ingenuity and industrial prowess could overcome the obstacles of geography, enemy fire, and operational risks. Even more importantly, it demonstrated that the U.S. was no longer simply reacting to the Axis offensive. In the skies over Europe and across the vast expanse of the Pacific, American technological superiority was coming to the forefront. The magnesium frames of bombers and fighters gave the Allies the edge they needed to project power deep behind enemy lines, strike vital targets, and disrupt Axis logistics on an unprecedented scale. It was the start of a shift in the global balance of power, one that would ultimately lead to the downfall of both the Nazi regime in Germany and the Empire of Japan. This was the moment when the true potential of American industrial might, underpinned by breakthroughs like the magnesium extraction program, became fully realized. Dow Chemical's innovation did not just provide a solution to a material shortage, it provided the catalyst for victory. The once crippling shortage of magnesium, which had constrained American military production in the early years of the war, had now become a strategic asset that would enable the U.S. to launch attacks on the heart of Axis power. In the Pacific, the magnesium-fortified B-29 Superfortress, introduced in late 1943, would go on to carry out one of the most famous missions in history, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The success of these bombers, and their ability to endure the long flights required to strike Japan's mainland, was only possible because of the innovations in lightweight magnesium alloy. The magnesium-based technologies, once a mere solution to a logistical challenge, had become a central part of the U.S. war effort, bringing the war to a decisive and horrifying conclusion. The aftermath of Dow Chemical's magnesium extraction program and the broader industrial mobilization it symbolized marked a fundamental shift in the course of World War II. As the war raged on, it became evident that the United States' ability to outproduce its enemies was one of the most crucial factors in the eventual Allied victory. The innovation in magnesium extraction had transformed from a technical necessity into a strategic asset, influencing everything from aircraft production to military munitions and beyond. In 1944, As the war in Europe reached its critical stages, the U.S. Army Air Force had become a dominant force in the skies. The production of bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress, B-24 Liberator, and the B-29 Superfortress, all of which relied heavily on magnesium for their frames, had soared to unprecedented levels. By the end of the war, more than 12,000 B-17s alone had been produced, and their magnesium-enhanced durability had played a key role in their effectiveness during critical bombing campaigns across Europe and the Pacific. The impact of magnesium on the American industrial war machine was felt most acutely in the context of air superiority. As the Allies secured victory in the skies over Europe, Japan's imperial ambitions in the Pacific were steadily crushed. The use of magnesium alloy bombers had enabled the U.S. to maintain its relentless bombing campaign, undermining Axis morale and disrupting their industrial capabilities. The bombardment of German factories and oil fields, for instance, dealt a crippling blow to the Nazi war effort, preventing the production of essential weapons and supplies needed to continue the fight. The turning point in the Pacific came with the introduction of the B-29 Superfortress, which was among the most advanced bombers of the war. Its development and eventual deployment in 1944 marked a decisive moment in the conflict. The B-29's ability to carry heavier payloads over greater distances was only made possible by magnesium's lightweight properties. Without it, the Superfortress would not have been able to carry out its long-range missions, including the fateful raids on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In essence, magnesium made possible the kind of strategic bombing campaigns that ultimately forced Japan to surrender. However, the aftermath of these technological advances was not without cost. The strategic bombings, though instrumental in the defeat of Germany and Japan, also led to widespread destruction and loss of life, particularly in the case of the atomic bombings of Japan. The use of magnesium to construct the aircraft that delivered the bombs signified the culmination of a long and often painful journey through industrial mobilization, human sacrifice, and the relentless march toward technological supremacy. The very materials that had enabled victory also highlighted the brutal realities of modern warfare, where technological advancements, while a means of achieving peace, also led to unprecedented devastation. In the U.S., the impact of the magnesium extraction program reverberated far beyond the end of the war. The lessons learned in metallurgy and industrial production would contribute to the post-war economic boom. The techniques for large-scale extraction and production of magnesium were applied in peacetime industries, advancing everything from aviation to automotive production. Magnesium became a standard component in many consumer goods, ushering in a new era of technological progress. Yet, for all its transformative effects, the program also left a legacy of environmental and social consequences. The intense industrial demand for magnesium led to the creation of mining operations that had long-lasting environmental impacts. Furthermore, the labor force required to sustain this production often included marginalized communities, including women and minority workers, whose contributions were vital but often went unrecognized. The wartime shift in industrial labor would lay the groundwork for future labor movements and social changes that would reshape the American workforce in the decades to come. The full scope of magnesium's impact, however, was not only measured by the direct outcomes of war, but by the profound shifts it caused in the global balance of power. By 1945, as the war in Europe concluded and the Allied forces turned their attention to the Pacific, the United States had emerged as the undisputed industrial and technological leader of the world. In a matter of just a few short years, America had transitioned from a country that lacked the basic materials to produce sufficient military equipment to a hyper-efficient manufacturing powerhouse that could churn out the highest quality aircraft, bombs, and tanks at an unparalleled rate. The magnesium extraction technology, pioneered by Dow Chemical, became a symbol of this industrial juggernaut, a key element that empowered the United States to win the war of production. As the Allies moved into Germany and Japan in 1945, seizing key industrial sites, it became clear that no country, neither the Axis powers nor any of the other combatants, could match the United States' manufacturing prowess, particularly in the realm of advanced materials and metallurgy. In Europe, the economic landscape was left in ruins. Cities and industries lay in ashes, entire populations displaced, and critical infrastructure shattered. Germany, once the technological hub of Europe, found itself struggling to rebuild. The Nazi war machine, which had once been at the cutting edge of military technology, had been systematically dismantled by Allied bombings and the relentless tide of American production. The U.S. had become the linchpin of the post-war recovery, both militarily and economically. Magnesium, as one of the materials that had propelled the U.S. to victory, continued to play a significant role in the post-war era. The U.S. government, through organizations like the War Production Board and later the Department of Defense, ensured that the lessons learned from the war were applied to the civilian sector. Magnesium alloys, essential during the war for aircraft and other weaponry, were now used in peacetime industries, particularly aviation and automotive manufacturing. American companies, from automobile giants like Ford to aviation pioneers like Boeing, began using magnesium to produce lightweight components for the burgeoning consumer and commercial markets. But it was not just technological supremacy that marked the end of the war, it was also the ethical and moral reckoning that followed. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, enabled in large part by magnesium alloy bombers, brought to the forefront the harrowing consequences of using technology to wage war on such an unprecedented scale. The world would never again see warfare in the same way. The bombings of Japan and the subsequent end of the conflict ushered in a new geopolitical era. It was an era where the United States stood at the helm, not only as a military power but also as a symbol of technological achievement, industrial capacity, and scientific innovation. However, the legacy of World War II was far from straightforward. The very materials and techniques that had led to victory would also contribute to the Cold War arms race. As the U.S. emerged as the victor, the Soviet Union quickly recognized the importance of magnesium and other materials in the development of advanced weapons. The arms race that followed would see both superpowers racing to develop the next generation of aircraft, tanks, and nuclear weapons, often relying on the same materials that had secured victory in the Second World War. In Japan, the aftermath of the war was marked by a different set of challenges. The country was devastated both physically and psychologically. The loss of the war, compounded by the destruction wrought by atomic bombs, forced a reckoning with Japan's wartime ambitions. Yet, even in the darkest hours, the Japanese would rebuild, and their industrial capabilities would, in the decades to come, evolve into one of the most advanced in the world. Magnesium, although once the cornerstone of their war machine, would become a key component in Japan's post-war industrial renaissance. Despite its military application, the use of magnesium also had a profound impact on post-war civilian life. Its role in transportation and consumer goods heralded the dawn of a new age of technological sophistication. The lightweight, durable material played a role in the construction of early automobiles, as well as the rockets and spacecraft that would carry humanity into the space age. The American success in magnesium extraction served as a reminder of what was possible when industrial might, scientific ingenuity, and wartime necessity collided. However, it also served as a cautionary tale of the cost of such advances, both in terms of human lives lost and the environment affected. In the years following the war, efforts were made to mitigate the environmental damage caused by magnesium mining, but the rapid industrial expansion would leave its scars on the American landscape for decades. In the grand historical context, the magnesium extraction story is one of remarkable innovation, strategic foresight, and intense human effort, but it also underscores the profound ethical complexities of warfare. What was a triumph of American ingenuity was, at the same time, a marker of how technological progress, when applied in the service of war, can have far-reaching consequences. The story of magnesium's role in World War II encapsulates the multifaceted nature of technological development in wartime. The events surrounding magnesium extraction in 1940 stand as a profound testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the American people during World War II. What began as a dire shortage in a crucial material quickly transformed into a symbol of the nation's ability to adapt and innovate under the most extreme conditions. The ingenuity displayed in the face of adversity not only altered the course of the war, but reshaped the future of global industrial and technological development. But beneath the triumph of technological progress, there lies an unavoidable tension between the potential for human innovation and the destructive power that such advancements can yield. The use of magnesium alloys to build lighter, faster, and more effective weapons was pivotal to the Allied victory, but it also contributed to the tragic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The same technology that won the war for the United States would also serve as a grim reminder of the destructive capacity of modern warfare. In the years that followed, as the world confronted the consequences of the war, the very tools that had defined victory would come to symbolize the dawn of a new and more dangerous era. While magnesium became the key to manufacturing victory, it was, in a broader sense, the American response to an almost overwhelming crisis that allowed the United States to become the dominant force in the post-war world. It was not only the mastery of magnesium extraction that marked this period, but the broader ability of the nation to harness industrial might for both military and civilian purposes. America's post-war dominance in technology, production, and innovation set the stage for an era of unprecedented global influence. Yet, in this reflection, there is also the inevitable contemplation of the costs. The war itself, a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, left deep scars not just in the physical landscapes of Europe and the Pacific, but in the hearts of all nations involved. The millions who perished, the families broken, and the lives irreparably altered stand as a solemn reminder that every technological leap forward comes with its price. The story of magnesium extraction and the broader efforts to sustain the war machine reminds us that innovation can be both a force for good and for destruction. The materials that built the weapons that defeated tyranny also contributed to the suffering of innocent lives. It is a paradox that history has shown time and again. The very tools that can protect civilization can also be the ones that threaten to destroy it. As we look back on this pivotal chapter in history, we are reminded that the legacy of World War II is not just in the military victories or technological advancements, but in the lessons we learn from the choices made in the heat of conflict. The extraction of magnesium from seawater, while a seemingly small part of the broader war effort, encapsulates the ethos of that moment in time, a moment when survival and ingenuity merged to shape the course of history. The power of innovation, when directed toward the common good, can be transformative. But when placed in the service of destruction, it can alter the fabric of the world in ways that extend far beyond the immediate battlefields. Magnesium, in the end, is more than just a metal. It is a reminder of the complex, often contradictory nature of progress, and the price we pay for the pursuit of victory.